So good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to today's CPD webinar here from the discipline of radiation therapy. I'm just going to wait about 30 seconds until we give people a chance to get into the room and then we'll start. Okay, so I think we can begin. So again, you're all very welcome to today's CPD webinar here at the Discipline of Radiation Therapy at Trinity College in Dublin. My name is Michelle Leach and I'm Professor in Radiation Therapy and I will be moderating today's session. So today's session, as you can see from the slide, is all about research, your research proposal and your research journey. And before I introduce the speaker for today, I'd just like to share with you, if you want to ask some questions during the session, if you please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, not the chat. The chat is not enabled for webinar, so the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take those questions at the end, if that's okay. So I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker to you as my dear colleague and friend, Professor Laure Marignol. And Professor Marignol is Professor in Radiation Biology here at our discipline in Trinity College, and she's also an elected Fellow of the University. Laure is Head of Research for our discipline here, and she was the driving force behind the creation of our research group called Applied Radiation Therapy Trinity. And she also leads her own translational radiobiology and molecular oncology research laboratory. So I'm sure you can agree with me that she's very well placed to deliver this presentation today about the research proposal and your research journey. So I'll stop there, and Laure, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. So yeah, I think thank you for joining the call and taking a moment to reflect a little bit on the research proposal. It is a term you probably have heard quite a lot about, and you may not know what it is or appreciate why it is so important for you to adopt this document and really make it part of your research journey. So you probably joined this call because you have a goal, and your goal is likely to be that you want to start a research project, and perhaps you're not sure how to go about it, and that's why you came today. But I'd like to change your goal to, I want to become a researcher. Because really doing a research project goes hand in hand with learning to really behave like a researcher, think like a researcher, and importantly, acquire the skills that researchers have. And this is something that all of us can strive to achieve. And this is what I want to explain today of what it means to become a researcher. So first off, you might be wondering why becoming a researcher is something I need to consider. Why is it important or relevant to my profession? So I'll take the example of radiation therapy, of course, and obviously we need a lot of radiation therapy research. And the idea is that by becoming a researcher, you can contribute to this radiotherapy research. So you might want to acquire new academic qualification. You might want to learn ways to solve clinical problems or provide solutions yourself. And if you're involved in training your peers, as we all are at some point in our career, you might want to integrate your experience of research into your teaching. Getting involved in research is very well linked into your learning experience. You're going to utilize skills that you have somewhere about resource management, about working in teams, and if you are practicing as a radiation therapist or in a healthcare profession, research and learning skills is something that will be linked to the proficiency of your regulators that allowed you to become a licensed practitioner. And you want to bring this in because you want to take your learning experience, your clinical practice, and translate this into better care. You might want to bring that into research. And you can see that it is a continuum and a loop where you all go through different stages over time. So you might want to translate new evidence into practice, maybe something you've learned or read about somewhere, and you want to put into your clinics. You might want to understand why you are doing certain things, so understand the theory behind the different processes or guidelines that might come to your desk to implement. And of course, we are all encouraged to strive for continuous professional development. You want to improve your career, you want to advance, and therefore you want to engage with a research adventure or journey, as I call this. So there's a number of reasons that becoming a researcher is going to be relevant to your profession. The word research can be a little bit scary for many people, but I like to call it more exciting because doing research gives you a lot of freedom to explore many things that you might have an interest in. And I often use this example of drawing a duck and share you out, and I do this with students quite often. So I was to give you the picture on the left inside and ask you to draw a duck. If you're not very talented like me, you probably would draw a duck like this one, just a simple circle. And we would all kind of agree that it might be looking like a duck. But the reality is that if I ask 20, 30 people to draw a duck, as I have done with students of mine a few years back, you can see that everybody would draw a duck quite differently. And we will all agree these are all ducks, but we could also agree that some might be more realistic than others, and we might be able to critique how this person went about creating this duck. And there's a lot of analogy with research because when we do research, we might all strive to draw a doc, we might all strive to answer specific questions, but we might all go about it in a slightly different way. And we use each other's knowledge and experience and ideas to critique each other and strive to get the best project or the best answer possible for what we want to do. So I call research exciting because it really is exciting to know that you can go about something in many different ways. So what does it mean to become a researcher? Well, being a researcher means that you have the skills to acquire background and specific knowledge on a research topic that you have an interest in. It means that you acquire the capacity to critically analyze, present and defend published research findings related to that topic. It means that you become able to critique the study design of certain research studies that you've read about or heard about. You become proficient in formulating research questions, setting aim and objectives and hypotheses that are related and important for the research study that you want to conduct. And then finally, that you are able to design a project methodology for a research topic. So being a researcher really means a number of things. And really, I will go as far as saying that you need to be able to do all of these 5 things to really strive as a researcher. And in fact, if you want to acquire background in your specific knowledge, it means that you need to be able to critique what you're reading to acquire the knowledge in the first place. So these might seem like a lot of skills to acquire, but in fact, they are very interlinked. And in this world of research where anything is possible if you want, I suppose the reassuring part is that research needs to follow a strict process. So we're not just walking in the dark. We have some idea of where we need to go and the steps that we need to take. And a few years back, I've tried to formalize these steps. And for me, becoming a researcher means learning to climb the steps of the research process. So what are these steps? We identified 5 steps. And I like this analogy of a tree because really you are going to flourish an idea and a project and a research area by going through these steps yourself and conducting the research that you want to be involved in. So what are those 5 steps of the research process? Well, first of all, research always starts with strong roots. We always start from what the others have done before us. We never start something fresh out of the blue. First job is always to go and read what have my peers done in the past and what can I learn from it. So you will always do step 1, which is acquiring your knowledge and building these roots. And once you've done that, you can start to build the trunk of this tree because by building this trunk, this trunk, you're going to give your research a strong structure. And it is made up of the skills. So step 1 is learning to acquire knowledge in an area of interest. So if you have an idea in mind today, the first thing you need to do is go and read about it and get yourself well attuned to what is happening in that idea, what has been tried before, what has failed, what are the things that we are still not sure and need to get more information on. Once you've gone through that process, you'll be able to pick out the research question or the specific elements that you want to focus on. This then will lead you to thinking about, okay, what can I do about it? What are my aims? What objectives can I set for myself? And importantly, what hypothesis might I be able to try and test with the resources and the time and the capabilities that I have available to me? Once you've defined this aim, objective, and hypothesis, then you can look at step 4. And step 4 is really a portfolio of methodologies that we have out there to help us design a study that would be appropriate to answering our question. And this is where the richness of research can come and where all these docs and all these drawings that show you come from, is because there's different ways that we can tackle the same question. And then step 5 is obviously being able to tell others about this. So presenting your results, defending the results, and really make your research visible. And the idea of this tree is that at the end, you have all this beautiful tree has grown, you have your research paper, you have your research proposal, which I'll come back to, you present your work, and this leaf is eventually going to fall and is going to give you the next roots for the next tree. So it really is an iterative process and something that's constantly evolving as you embark on your journey of research. But becoming a researcher, it must be said, is also striving to follow the rules. So while we have a lot of freedom and it's very exciting and we can go about things in many different ways, we have to be very careful in how we do this. And by this, I mean we need to obey the rules of research ethics. And when you become a researcher, it's very important that you're aware of the ethical principles of research, and in particular for medical research. And you may or may not know that we have guiding principles that are based on the Declaration of Helsinki, which is a really lengthy document that explained the ethical principles of how we are authorized or how we feel it's acceptable to do some human experimentation. And we can find this on the World Medical Association on a website. And if you decide to undertake research, you will be faced with applying to an ethics board to ensure that the project or the research you propose meets those principles. And if you are not sure what to do, then you need to get guidance to make sure that you don't deviate from these principles. The second thing that we accept as we decide to become a researcher is that we're going to work within a research code of conduct. And there's 4 pillars to this research code of conduct. The first one is honesty. And we really rely on researchers to be honest. And that means that you will never fabricate or falsify or misrepresent data. And that's because if you were to do that, you would deceive your colleagues. And if you think about my tree analogy, if you generate a bad a study that is incorrect, that is falsified, where you bring that person to build their roots of their tree under false information, and therefore their research is going to be dramatically impacted. We try to be objective, and objectivity is really important because you want to detach yourself from the research. So it's not about what you think is happening. It's not about your beliefs. It's not about what you want to see. It's about what the data that you generate tells you. And that is why when you read research papers or go to research presentations, the presenter may be asked or will often disclose any personal or financial interests that they have that could affect their research. So sometimes we do have to be very careful. For example, in the past, if you had a research funded by the tobacco industry, well, that would be a conflict of interest if your research is about the fact that tobacco has no impact on health, for example. You may have a vested interest in the way the direction of that research might go. And it's really important that you are honest about this and that you remain objective in how you conduct your research. You need to be competent. That means that, yes, you can do research tomorrow, but don't start doing experiments where you have no training for. So if you've never performed surgery or never taken blood from someone, you are not qualified to do research where you're going to go out and take blood from patients. You're going to have to be trained and have the competence to do that. And that comes from your lifelong learning and the willingness as a researcher to learn new skills, to be as competent as you can be in carrying out the work that needs to be carried out. And the last pillar is carefulness and openness. And we live now in a world of open science. And we really count on researchers to keep good records, to have books where they make note of what they've done on a daily basis, that you will share your data, you will share your results, your ideas, your tools, your resources, and that really you work with others as opposed to against everybody else. And a really critical thing of being a researcher is that you need to be open to criticism and new ideas. So the same way, if you draw a duck, someone might come along and say, oh, I think the legs are too short, or I think the beak could be a bit more yellow. You need to be aware that if you become a researcher, your work will be scrutinized, and you have to be able to accept that this is going to come, and this is not about you. It's not about saying bad things about you. It's about your peers trying to help you be the best that you can be. So being open to criticism is part of the research code of conduct. So coming back to trying to do research, when we do research, usually what we do is we do a project. We've all had projects in our daily lives. We see projects on the news all the time. And the pillars of a good project is that it has a purpose. You need a clear start and a clear endpoint. You need to know where you want to go. It needs a detailed plan of the work to be completed, and then a means to track the quality and the timely completion of this work. You need to have the resources to do it. You need a timeline, and often you need, obviously, finance. You need a budget. So when you want to undertake research, it's very important that you have a clear idea of, okay, where do I want to bring this idea to within the time frame available to me? Otherwise, you're very unlikely to get there. And that's where your research proposals come into play, because your research proposal is your battle plan. It's a document that will tell you and tell others as to what you are planning to do. And why is it important that we plan our research? Well, it's because if we fail to plan, we prepare to fail. You've all heard that saying. If you don't have good planning and good design, you end up with data that is very hard to make sense of. And there is a little bit of a tendency of being very focused on statistical significance, on the idea that, oh, I need to get those famous p-values and I need to show something significant, or I'm not being a researcher. But being too focused on the results, on the statistics, can have very bad consequences. It can mean that you have misleading results because you haven't planned your study properly to make sure your data is of the quality it needs to be. It could lead to malpractice. It could be dangerous. And above all, it could be a waste of your time, the time of your peers, resource, and money. So planning research is extremely important. And this is where, again, your research proposal is going to come into play. So what is a research proposal? It's a document. And if you want, it's one thing it is, it's a sales pitch. It's where you tell others about the fact that you have an idea, you have something of significance, of importance that needs to be addressed. You have a specific end page. You can explain why that is a project worthwhile doing. You know a lot of the background that led to this project. You may have already secured the people that you're going to work with, and you have evidence of that. You've already done some pilot data to show that the idea is viable, that it's likely to work, or you have published in the area. And you're able to convey this to your audience in a very clear and understandable message. So it's a document that people use to assess whether this particular piece of work has value, is worthwhile doing and investing time, money, and people. But for you, it's also your battle plan. If you want to build a big bridge across a river, you're going to have to tell the engineer what you want it to look like, what are these physical characteristics, how long it needs to be, how deep, and you can see here a representation of the drawings that might need to be produced. You need to think about the materials that's going to be required, the craftsmanship, the people. And therefore, when we do a research proposal, we think about all the materials and all the things that we need to ensure that our project can actually become a reality. So what does a research proposal look like? You can see many examples online, but usually, of course, you're going to have a title to tell people what it's about. You need to provide a background to explain to the person reading it where this project is coming from, what do we already know, what is missing. And then that will lead you to the questions. What are the questions that your research is going to try to answer? How are you going to go about answering? That's your methods. What do you propose to actually do to generate data or generate answers? And then a working plan or schedule. So how long are you going to be working on this? And when do you expect to finish? And of course, because the roots of our project come from the work of others, well, we're going to have a bibliography. We're going to have to cite and refer to the people before us that have already produced some evidence to contribute to this topic that we are going to add more information on. So the format of this proposal is quite standard, actually. It will always have a title, a background, questions, methods, a schedule, a biography at its core, and then depending who you write it for, some of these sections can be a little bit more elaborate. So research proposals really are part of your research journey, and I will go as far as saying that you cannot be a researcher without writing research proposals. So anytime you have an idea that you want to pursue, going through the process of writing the research proposal will help you immensely in making sure that you can produce your best work. This proposal is a document. It's usually on a Word document that you write, and you do this to do it for yourself, but you also do it to convince others that you have a good idea, that you can do it, and that you know how you're going to be able to do it. And therefore, this document should contain all the key elements involved in a research process. It should tell us what you want to accomplish, why you want to do it, and how you are going to do it. And a really good research proposal, in fact, could be given to someone else with similar skill, and they might be able to actually go and do the work on your behalf, for example. So what does a research proposal really bring, or what does it actually collate? So if you have here an anatomy of the research proposal, we usually have an opening which tells us about the topic of a study, about a literature review of what do we know, the state of knowledge, where you will explain what we know already about this. You will explain what a scientific problem is that needs to be addressed, and then the research problem that this particular proposal is going to try to tackle. You're going to have an idea of the who, the what, and the why. So what is your long-term goal? What are your aim and objectives, and why you want to do this? And then you have your methods. So again, your objectives and how the hypothesis you want to test and how you're going to do it. And then we usually end with a payoff of what we expect will happen when this project is completed. So if I focus on the first part in defining your idea, which is that the research proposal needs to address a significant scientific problem. And a scientific problem is a questions that you have that could be answered with an experiment. And as I have from this quote here, one of the art of doing science is deciding which problems to concentrate on and which one to ignore. So part of your reading and your understanding and acquiring knowledge on the topic goes into having to pinpoint the exact problem that you want to try to address. So scientific problem to be worthwhile usually is said to needs to have significance. It needs to improve current scientific knowledge. It needs to answer a question for which currently there is no answer. We try to be novel in our approaches. It needs to perhaps improve technical capability in the field. Ideally, it will improve clinical practice. And if you're very lucky, it will improve and change the field entirely. So you need to demonstrate that this project, this idea, this problem you want to tackle really could make a difference. So how do we define if a project is significant? How do we know if your question does not currently have an answer? Well, that's because you're going to read the literature. You're going to go back to what has been done in the past and do what we call a literature review. And it's a really important first step as you begin your research proposal. So the literature review is about knowing what others have done before and synthesizing this evidence. It's a comprehensive search of previous research on a topic. It looks at scholarly article, books, and any other source relevant to this particular area of research, and try to provide a really good, solid summary of what we know already about this. In order to do this, you need to have skills that are called information literacy. It means that you need to learn to use the best sources, know where to look for information, and use good ingredients, if you want, for this literature review. So learning to know where are the scientific articles and which sources are reliable and not. So you need to learn these skills perhaps with a librarian, for example. Your research proposal will then need to address a relevant research problem. And the research problem is a specific unknown that the study sets out to answer within the scientific problem. So if I give you an example, you might have a problem. You don't know which is the best treatment for this condition. That's a problem that we have. Nobody really knows what we should be doing. It's quite a general question. But your research question, the thing that you might want to address is, okay, well, what are the comparative benefits of hydrotherapy and nicotine replacement therapy for smoking cessation? Or does aspirin reduce the incidence of stroke? So you pinpoint to very specific questions that you want to answer to try to help address the problem of which is the best treatment for this person. So you go from a very general idea, which is a scientific problem, to a specific question, which is what your research question is going to be. And that's a very, very challenging process. And I won't lie to you, it's not going to be easy to know what question you want to address. And that's, again, where you're reading, your understanding of the topic and your experience and talking to your peers is going to help you identify what questions you need to ask and which ones you want to try to answer. Okay, so again, you go from a very general scientific problem to trying to define the scientific question, the research questions that you, in fact, would like to answer. A question is linked to a research hypothesis. So the research hypothesis is where you state what you speculate is likely to happen. So I speculate that if a person takes aspirin, there's going to be less strokes occurring. But then you need to go and conduct a study or an experiment to test this hypothesis to see what the data tells you and decide if you are correct or incorrect. And therefore, once you know what is the problem you want to plug into, what problems are outstanding, what question you really want to answer, then you go into your objectives, into how am I going to address this? What do I want to do at my level to contribute to this body of knowledge? And this is one part that is very important in your research proposal. So you need then to ask yourself, what are my goals within the project? Where am I going? Am I going to cross a bridge across this river? Am I going to go as far as the tree? Is my bridge going to have 1 step or 2 steps? So you need to think about where the project is going to end and then the objectives or how you're going to get there. So aim and objective is something that we all struggle a little bit with because they can be mixed up quite easily. But the easier way for me to remind them is that an aim is the reason for the project to exist. For example, this project aims to reduce recurrence among prostate cancer patients after treatment. And the objective is describing how in this project I am going to go about generating the data that we need to meet this aim of reducing the recurrence in these patients. So this is your practical, achievable priorities and that you can probably put down as a list of things that you need to do. So the research proposal has a very large section called the methodology, which is where you describe and really put pen to papers and explain how am I going to do it. It refers to this battle plan. What is it going to look like? What are the things I need to do in order to actually meet my objective? So usually in a document in your research proposal, you will go into quite a lot of detail as to how you're going to collect your data, what data you will collect, and then importantly, how are you going to analyze this data? And this is a step that is often a little bit overlooked. So we have an idea, we have a hypothesis, we have a question, and we go and collect data. And we don't necessarily sit down and think about what am I actually collecting and how am I going to analyze it. And if you don't do this, you end up in a situation where you've done all this data collection, you have a big Excel sheet in front of you, and you don't have any idea of what to do next. What do I do with all these numbers? What should I calculate? What should I compare? And really, by doing a research proposal, you should never find yourself in your situation, because before you even collect the data, you already have mapped out what you need to do with it. So when someone reads a research proposal, or where you develop your own research proposal, at that stage, you have a clear idea of what have people done before me? What is a problem I really want to plug into? What are the problems that are outstanding here? And what is my goal? What am I going to contribute to try to help answering these questions? And then importantly, how do I propose to do it? What am I going to do to provide new data that will provide an answer to these questions? But I told you at the very start that the research proposal is also a little bit of a sales pitch. And for people to follow you, for you to justify spending this time and effort and often money into conducting this project, you need to have good payoff. So you need to be able to have foresight of what are the expected outcomes of this project, and what its impact will be. So usually in a research proposal, the last part will always be about these payoffs. It's trying to convince or map out or really be very clear as to what good will come from actually conducting this project. So your project relevance is going to be a statement of the benefits to be gained, of the problem that can be solved by doing this project. The relevance of the project will tell us how efficient the outcome of the project is expected to be with respect to the goal. So how close will you be to preventing these recurrences, these patients, if we complete this piece of work? And the goal will be different depending on who conduct the research. Usually it tends to be to increase scientific knowledge, but perhaps the motivation of the goals are more directly related to social or environmental benefits for society at large. So it's not necessarily about the basic science. Sometimes it's about improving society and the lives of people. So the research proposal is a place where you're going to be able to ask yourself, what are the implications of this work? What are potential questions that justify further exploration? And for example, is having to think about that this project is likely to suggest that, we need to do this piece of work, that these are questions that remain to be addressed. Perhaps you can identify, well, others before me are focused on a certain aspect, but this project is going to add information on a slightly different aspect. And when we combine the two, you could argue that we are a step closer to finding a solution to this problem that we've both identified. For a project to be attractive and to have buy-in from people, usually we like to know about the reach of the project. How many people, who and how many people are going to benefit from this project is a very important piece of information. And that links to how big a problem it was in the first place. If you decide to tackle a very, very rare occurrence, something that affects very, very few patients, it's not to say that the project is not worthwhile, but the fact that it only benefits a tiny, tiny number of patients could make the buy-in from sponsors, from peers, from patients, from people a little bit more tricky to gain, because you're only addressing the needs or a problem that affects a small number of people. If your project can reach a large number of people and you have a good idea of who's going to be affected by this, it means that you can provide more relevance and impact of your projects can be much bigger. And finally, it's what is the likely importance of your project, and trying to think about, well, if I develop this new diagnostic test for these patients, well, what will happen to these patients? What will change for these people if my project was to become successful? So how important or valuable the impact is to each beneficiary, for each individual patient that you propose to provide a solution for. What would change for them? And you need, and by thinking about this, sometimes we identify that the way we have planned misalign with what the patients might benefit from. So you might go back a step, go back to your methodology, go back to your questions, and you're going to perhaps adapt your plan a little bit to make sure that the payoffs are as good as they can be. And what I'm hitting on here is that a research proposal is a live document. It's something that evolves all the time. You write it with your best intentions, you develop it as best as you can at the time that you write it, but it's likely to require a little bit of tweaking by, talking to a peer, talking to patients, talking to the specialist for specific techniques that you might want to use. And the richness of the document is that it allows you to incorporate all of this input that you might be able to gather from people around you that you're going to be working with on this particular piece of work. So to conclude, yes, research can be a little bit scary because, there's so many options that we can go for, but that is what makes it exciting, in my opinion. The good news is that we are not working in the dark. We have a code of conduct, we have ethical guidelines, and we know what skills we need to gain. The skills are, we need to know to learn about our topic. We need to be able to find what the gaps are and generate questions. We need to identify our aim and objectives of what we can realistically can do to contribute to this body of knowledge. We need to be aware of the methodologies that exist and make informed decisions as to which one we might want to use or learn to use. And then we need to learn to disseminate, to write it all up and tell others about our ideas and our results and our challenges. So becoming a researcher is really acquiring a lot of skills. And like everything that you want to become in life, it's all down to practice. So the more you engage in it, the more you practice, the more you read papers, the more you talk to your peers about research ideas, the more you identify the beneficiaries of what the problems might be that you want to solve, the more proficient you become and the better researcher you will become. So to come back to my title, the research proposal is something that is really a companion on this journey. And you're going to write a lot of proposals in your lifetime as a researcher. Each proposal will be slightly different, will have its own challenges. And you could be writing 2 or 3 proposals at the same time. It really is a process that allows you to put pen to paper on really explaining and defining what it is that you want to do and identify what is realistic for you to achieve, and also identify what help you might need. Because one thing to remember when you're doing research is that you don't need to be able to do it all yourself. You have collaborators, you have friends, you have professors, you have peer students that you can call on to come and help you. And usually research is done as a team. So you need to have these generic skills. But, if you understand what data analysis you want to do, doesn't mean you need to be the best statistician in the world. You just need to know that you need to find a statistician that can help you carry out with specific tests that you want to do. So the research proposal is really your companion on this journey. And you need to embrace it, give it your best, and it will really help you creating your own trees and leaves and really enjoy the richness that research can bring us. And I think a lot of researchers get a lot of enjoyment from doing this research, and I hope you all will in the near future. So good luck to all of you creating your trees and leaves. I like to tell them, and never be afraid to ask for help, because it's not easy to be a researcher, but it can bring a lot of rewards as well. So on this, that's kind of all I wanted to say today, and I'm happy to take any questions that might be there in the audience.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Laure, for that. I might ask you to stop sharing your screen when you're ready, please. Yeah, thanks for laying that out so in such a stepwise way, because I think that's extremely helpful for people and really breaks down maybe a lot of the myths, I suppose, is that a fair term to use about the research process. And I think you've made it very accessible for everyone today. So thanks very much for that. You know I have questions because I always have questions. So while there's someone has beaten me to it, Philippa. Philippa has asked, just saying thank you to you for this really important topic for the RTT profession. And actually, thanks, Philippa, for that prompt, because I was going to say that to you, Laura, about, obviously research can come anywhere, and I'm aware a lot of our audience today are radiation therapists who are working in the clinic. And I guess, sometimes the experience can be as maybe a trial coordinator, it can be as part of running a clinical trial. I mean, do you still think it's important, if you're, say, a radiation therapist treating patients who are on a clinical trial, that you understand the background to how the research trial or the trial that you're part of as the treating radiation therapist has come about from this proposal? Do you still think it's a good idea that everybody understands, those steps that you've gone through today, regardless of whether they're the one writing them or not, I suppose?
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's part of your personal development as a therapist. If you are part of this trial, it means you are an active piece of that puzzle. You really are helping generate this evidence that could potentially change practice. So I think in order to do your job the best it can be, if you could really understand what this trial is about, what it is trying to answer, what are the things that could change for this patient if the trial was successful, or perhaps even more importantly, know what could go wrong, what could be overlooked in this trial that could give us a false idea of what actually is happening. I think at anybody's level, you're not going to necessarily know as much as the person behind the trial or the company or whoever has set the trial, but having a good grounding of what the trial is about could really add, I suppose, meaning to your work. But you don't know what experience you've had, that perhaps you think of something that wasn't thought about or was overlooked, and I think, yeah, definitely trying to write your own little research proposal of that trial you're being involved in would be a really good thing to do if you can. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And there's another question here. If a radiation therapist working in a radiotherapy department was interested in engaging in research, who should they approach? Manager or physics or radiation oncologist, in your opinion?
I think it's probably would be the manager to kind of have an idea of what is happening in your institution. Is there a trial ongoing that you could maybe get exposed to? And I will then, looking at the next question, which is the best piece of advice. So say you are walking on the floor and you are made aware of this, you go to a clinical trial unit and you're made aware of a trial and you think, oh, that's something I'm quite interested to know. Perhaps the first thing to do would be to ask the person running the trial, oh, is there a paper or a study that I could read to learn a little bit about this? And even by reading this paper, you're on your first step of the research journey, because by reading this, you acquire a little bit of knowledge. You begin to understand, okay, what methodologies they have used, and hopefully you'll be prompted to read a little bit more. And as you read more on this topic, you're building up these skills. So the best piece of advice is to just engage with someone doing it and ask, is there anything I can read to get started? And then build from there.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about PPI, as we call it in Ireland, so patient and public involvement in research, and that's really, I suppose, fundamental. Certainly, probably at the moment, for if you're writing your research proposal, and you're expecting to have it funded, so that you're getting money for your research. It's mandatory by a lot of funders at the moment. So, what advice would you have to people about getting patients and the public involved in their research proposals?
Yeah, I think it goes a little bit in link with the last part of the proposal, your payoff, right?
Mm.
And we can be guilty a little bit if we are too much about the science. Especially people say like me, I don't treat patients, so I may not never see the patients I'm developing solutions for. It's very valuable to try and speak to them and put yourself in their shoe to really understand, but what is the reality for them and what could change. And you'll be surprised that sometimes the thing as scientists we think needs to change is not necessarily what actually they want to see a change on. But importantly, in designing your proposal and deciding how am I going to go about doing it, their perspective can really guide how you're going to go and do it and put the emphasis on certain maybe little detail that can make a big difference. So yeah, I think it's really important that you know the people you design solutions for, that you speak to the patients, that you obviously also speak to the clinicians, that perhaps you'll need to actually do this new treatment. And really being a researcher is also about understanding different perspective. So you bring in your science, your ideas and all that, but then in a way their value is only if they really can benefit people. And the benefit could be other scientists. If someone is trying to answer a key basic science question, by trying to understand, well, where does my piece of the puzzle fit? How does that help that person advance their own things? And that comes from experience, and having the curiosity, obviously, to ask and be a little bit open-minded. So, okay, beyond my direct patient I'm treating, what other patients might be there? What about the radiation therapists on the floor? What about the person, treating in this trial? And understanding what they're facing can help you make a proposal really hitting the right notes.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm just thinking there as you're talking about it and about the impact section as well, it's probably a good idea for us to put out there to people that, the impact section, is so important to the PPI reviewers, so the public and patient reviewers, and also maybe to people who are reviewing who are not in your field. And I think for us, a lot of the time that's the most challenging part to write, because you kind of have to change your language somewhat, don't you? It's
You do,
more
yeah.
kind of journalistic style of writing rather than scientific on those aspects, and that's probably a good point to make for the audience today, to think about that. How do you tell a lay person about what you want to do? And I think that's quite a difficult skill. Would you agree with that?
It is a difficult skill, but I think if you do talk to these people, it becomes a little bit easier because you're more attuned to what they find challenging. So you end up speaking a little bit of the same language. The same way, if I gave you a research proposal on building new batteries for your iPhone and you know nothing about this, you will need the person to really explain to you, well, why is it good that we spend 5 million developing this new battery? Like what is it going to change for me, or what might be different? So it applies in any field, and you're always going to have to convince someone that know nothing about this, that yes, actually it's something that's worthwhile looking at. And when you go and you write a proposal for a grant, people on the panel could be from, they might not know anything about radiation therapy, and yet they are asked to rate your work and decide if it's worth investing in you or not. So you need to have something they can relate to say, yes, actually, I agree, this is good, or hopefully not say no. So but look, here we're putting the bar really high. I think someone studying research is not going to start with a grant proposal. But begin by reading about research, reading papers, be inquisitive, understand what people are trying and why they're doing it. What is this happening in my institution? Why are they testing this new immobilization device, for example? Getting exposed like this shapes your mind in a right, and you become a researcher doing this. I think if you already do this, you already are a researcher. And it's about building those skills up to the next level, I suppose.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a good piece of advice for us to finish on today. So I want to thank you again, Laure, very much for that really clear and thorough presentation. And I'm sure you've inspired our audience today to keep on their research journey. Thanks to everyone for joining today. Just to say that this webinar was recorded and it will be on our website on the TCD, the Discipline of Radiation Therapy TCD website afterwards, if you have colleagues who want to look at it for CPD purposes afterwards, because we know people are working in the clinic. And just to remind you that our next month's webinar is on a totally different topic, which hopefully will also be of interest to you. And it'll be presented by our colleague, Dr. Aileen Flavan, and it's on cyber attacks in radiation therapy, which is kind of a scary headline, and probably scary when it happens, but very important, of course, in this day and age. So we hope that you'll be able to join us next month for that one. But in the interim, thanks again for joining, everyone. Thank you, Laure,
Yep.
and hope everyone has a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.